Today I'm going to be unboxing and reviewing the Presonus Studio 192. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. So today I am going to be unboxing and reviewing this Presonus Studio 192 audio interface. Now I've decided to do this in three parts. One video focusing just on unboxing and why I chose this particular interface. Another one looking at the software and the setup of that on the system. And another one which is really exploring some of the specific features of this interface. So look out for those other videos if you're interested in those. In the process of looking at audio interfaces, I did consider another couple by Presonus. One was their actual new flagship, which was the Quantum, which actually is a really nice interface, and if you've got the money then please do check it out. But it had some features missing which I really wanted on an interface. The other one is the Studio 1824, which is a much cheaper interface but still a really good interface, which has a lot of the qualities of this interface. If you want to check out a really good review about that, then I'm going to put a link in the description to one of my friends' videos on this, and his name is Vachi from Recording Studio 9. He did, I think, 2 or 3 parts to his video where he talked about the Studio 1824 in depth. Now, moving on to this one and why I chose it. Well, it was a big choice. This is not the cheapest one on the market. This is a much more mid-tier kind of interface. I think in the US at the moment it sells for about $799 US. So that's not a small spend for a lot of us home studio owners. So I just want to caution, if you're just starting out and you're just doing a little bit of home recording, don't think that you need something as fancy as this. But you still might want to watch the rest of this video to see what can be achieved. So I'm coming from, my previous interface is a Focusrite Sapphire Pro 40 that's got 20 ins and 20 outs and has served me very well. I've had it for a few years and it's a Firewire interface. It was actually my third Focusrite interface in a row. I felt that they served me really well, and me jumping over to Presonus is not really a reflection of Focusrite. It's just that I felt this product had a few features that they couldn't offer me at the moment. Talking about that product though, there were a couple things I felt I must have and I must keep in this product. One of those things was multiple inputs, more than 2 inputs in fact. Now you've got to be careful for this when you're looking at specs, because these manufacturers are going to tell you something like it's got 36 inputs and 20 outputs or something along those lines. They're talking about things that you may or may not use, things like ADAT and SPDIF and those kind of inputs and outputs. What you really want to be interested in, and what most of us are going to be interested in, is how many mic and guitar type of inputs does it have. Now my old Focusrite had 8 ins and I found that that was very useful to me. The next thing was headphone outputs. My old Focusrite had 2 headphone outputs which had their own levels and their own mixers, independent mixers. I found this to be really useful. Now a lot of you may just be recording yourself and only ever using one headphone output, so to you that's not going to be very important. But I quite often work with other people and they like to have a different mix to me when they're tracking, so I found that to be a really useful feature to have on board. So those were the 2 things from my old Focusrite which I felt I must have in a newer interface. But then there were new things that I wanted which my old Sapphire Pro 40 could no longer offer me. I first want to talk about the type of connection. So this was a Firewire interface, and that's a kind of a bit of an old technology now. So it was important for me to have a more useful kind of interface. Now, of course, you know, there are things like Thunderbolt now, and they're really efficient interfaces, and the Quantum, for example, uses that. But for me, in my ecosystem, with all the devices I've got around my house, several computers, several laptops, The one thing they all have is USB. Now this is actually a USB 3 interface, which is a bit more efficient than USB 2, but it does also work on USB 2. So I won't be stuck if I'm perhaps using an older computer which doesn't have USB 3. Now the next thing was very, very important and one of the sexier features, and I looked around a lot of interfaces to find this feature. The problem I have is that I track in a different room to where my computer is. In other words, in my usual videos, you'll see me sitting in my studio. That's where my computer is, and that is what is my kind of control room, if you like. Now, down the hallway, I actually usually like to set up in a different room because I find there's more space in there, it just feels nicer and there's better acoustics. So I run a snake down the hall and I actually track in a different room. That's my live room, if you will. It's just another room in the house. Now, there are some problems associated with that. Imagine you've just sat down with your guitar, you've positioned the mic so it sounds really nice in the headphones, but the level's not quite right. So what have you got to do? Take the guitar off, go back to the studio, guess at what level you want to set it to, come back, try it, that's not quite right, go back again. Breaks your workflow, makes it hard to get good results. You're likely to settle for things that aren't quite right, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So that's caused me a lot of problem over the years when I've recorded in that fashion. So in this day and age, I thought surely there must be something which I can just control the gain of the interface from either a phone or a tablet, and there is, and this is one of those devices that can do that. The next thing, and this is very much a nice to have, is I wanted something which might have some onboard effects. In my old device, I did actually have an outboard effects unit which I used in a sort of an effects loop so that I could get some, say, reverb in the headphones while I was tracking. Big hassle, could only use it on one track at a time. I ended up not doing it most of the time, but it sort of niggles me because especially when I'm recording other people, it's nice for them to get a sense of what they're going to sound like in the final mix with things like compression, EQ, reverb. So this has got onboard effects which can be used on individual channels. You can hear them while you're recording, but they're not necessarily committed to track. So in other words, you do actually record the dry signal even though the performer can hear these various effects. You can also commit them to the track if you just think they sound awesome. That looks really, really good to me. I'm into things that might encourage the creative juices to flow during recording. So it's a nice to have, probably not a very, very necessary thing, but I'm looking forward to using it. And sort of last but not least on my sort of checklist was really good Studio One integration. So my DAW of choice is Studio One. I've been using it for about 3 years now. I love it to death, and this particular interface integrates really, really well with Studio One, including the ability from Studio One to make adjustments to the hardware itself, so you're not sort of swapping out from Studio One to another piece of software. That's really, really interesting to me, and hopefully it will improve my workflow. So those are the main reasons why I've chosen this audio interface. I should mention that it's been sitting in my studio for a week now, and I've resisted the temptation to unbox it. I've saved it for you guys. I had a whole bunch of other things to do, so it's been torturing me. So this is a pretty exciting moment for me. So let's see what's in the box. So first of all, it looks to be there's something which says, you probably can't see this, but it says stop. So there's some important information there, which I should probably read before I go and plug this in. A little user manual and a sticker, if you like that kind of thing. So I'll put that aside and we'll look inside the box. Let's have a look. First of all, looks like we've got a power cable, slightly unusual looking USB 3 cable. We'll put those aside down there. And a power block. This is actually kind of my preferred type of power block because it doesn't plug straight into the socket. It's got another cable which goes to the socket. So that makes it much easier when you're dealing with lots and lots of things plugged in your studio. And it looks like there's not much else in the box. In fact, there's nothing else in the box apart from the interface itself. So let's just chuck that aside somewhere so that we can get this little beauty out and have a look. Okay. So first of all, feels actually quite heavy for its size. It's not a particularly deep unit, but as I say, it does feel pretty solid for its size. So let's start off on the front. Right on this side, you have your two main inputs for microphone and instruments. It's always really handy to have some front-facing inputs when you're in your studio. The rest are around the back. Moving on to this area here, this is the main control area, and what happens here is you can cycle through your main channels with this backwards and forwards arrows, and then you can control the levels using this knob here. You also have a button to switch the phantom power off and on for each channel. You then have a talkback button, and that's another feature on this interface which is pretty cool. It's got some talkback features. You then have a mute and dim button, quite handy, and then right down the bottom a really handy feature which is a mono button, so to turn your output into a mono output, which is a really good thing to do during your mixing process. Highly recommended. The next thing we have are the LED sort of meters for each of the 8 channels, and then for your sort of stereo outputs. And then you have a nice big knob to control the volume of the output. You have your 2 headphone outputs with a level control for each of those, and then your main power button. So that's the front. Looks quite nice, and I love this brushed metal that they've put on there. Let's take a look though at the back. So starting off on this side, you have the 6 inputs that I was talking about on the back for XLR and your regular jack inputs for things like guitars. Then you have 8 outputs here, so that's really useful if you've got an additional set of monitors, or if you want to set up some extra headphone mixers, that kind of thing. Then you've got your main 2 outputs which will go to your speakers or to your monitors. Then you've got these word clock ins and outs, which I never use, so I won't be talking much about those. Then you have your SPDIF inputs and outputs. I do use those a fair amount because I have some connections in my studio which use those. And then you have your ADAT inputs and outputs, which are actually really useful for also expanding the unit to give it more inputs. Then underneath this sticker is the USB 3 connection, and then this is where your power supply plugs in. So that's the basic overview of the hardware. As I say, it feels really nice. I'm keen to get into my studio and get it all plugged in. I'm going to have to rip out my old gear and put this in, so it might take me a little while. I will cover that in my next video. Now, if you do like this kind of content and you haven't subscribed yet, then please do subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you can get notified of my future videos. Thank you for your time. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.